So I do have a question for us today. What are you doing here? Do you know you lost an hour of sleep last night and we have a second service, right? I feel like, did anyone wake up today and not realize you lost an hour of sleep until you saw a different clock, right? We live in a time, which I'm kind of sad about because this used to be one of my favorite times of year because all of the best share memes would be going around, right? If I could turn back time, right? Everyone was just sharing it with all their friends. But now our clocks just changed for us and we wake up in the morning and we don't realize we've lost an hour of sleep except we feel it in our bodies, okay? And so if you're feeling a little extra sleepy today, just shake it out, okay? It's because you slept less last night, all right? It's good. So my name is Cory. I get to be the lead pastor here and we are beginning a season called Lent. And this is not a season that we came up with. It's a season that the church has been practicing for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's a season that the church around the globe is starting today. Churches that look like us, churches that don't look like us, churches that believe many different things that we don't believe. And the whole global church leans in this season to follow the footsteps of Jesus to and through the cross to resurrection. And I think that is compelling. And so today marks the first Sunday of Lent where we will begin this season where we'll take this journey with Jesus very seriously and want to invite you to come with us. So I'm going to warn you right now, my whole goal of my message today is to sell you on something, okay? So as I'm talking and you're like, he's just trying to sell us on something. It's because I am, okay? I'm going to try and sell you on going on this journey with us because I think it's deeply formational and so important that we don't just end up on our little island of a church here in Jackson, Michigan. Again, we are like this unicorn of a church. I get it, right? But we are a part of a larger body, this larger thing that God is doing and has been doing around the globe. And so today, I want to try and invite you into that. Every August, my family and I go to Prince Edward Island, Canada. Some of you have been around, notice that I disappear for about 3 weeks every August. And we make this trek to Prince Edward Island, Canada. That's a little island way off the coast, the eastern coast of Canada. It's where my family is from. My grandmother is 94. She lives there. She had 12 kids. My dad is one of 12. And I have over, I lost count. It's almost 40 first cousins, right? And so once a year, we all travel back to the homestead where my grandmother raised all 12 of her children, and we get together as a family, and we go back every year. And we've made the decision since living in Michigan that we're going to drive there, that we get in a car, a vehicle, and we make the drive. We could fly, right? Not easily because it's this little island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but we could fly. But we drive there because I love spending that time with my family, right? It's this long road trip that we get to be together and share together and build memories together. And I don't know what your road trip experiences are, but road trips have been really formational in my life. There's something about being locked in a vehicle with people for hours and hours and hours that allows you to have conversations that you otherwise wouldn't get to. These conversations with our family, we find, okay, that it takes about 10 hours and then our kids become friends again, right? We're just in the car, right? And they eventually realize there are no other kids here. If you don't get along, you're stuck in the car with mom and dad, right? I can tell you, even for me, it takes me about 2 days of driving to just unravel my life in my head, to really actually begin to rest and have some important conversations with my family, with my wife, about our lives and what we want in life and what has happened over the last year. These road trips become really important. Lent is like this road trip. It invites us to walk the steps of Jesus with Jesus. It's intentionally a little bit long. It's intentionally a little bit slow. And there's no way to go on the Lenten journey except on purpose. You got to choose to get in the car and sit in the car with some people you mostly like, okay? And go through these steps with Jesus, learning and growing. I spent some time this week trying to trying to understand, the scriptures around like what people felt like and what they thought around this idea of following Jesus. It's kind of like phrase words or like cheek words that people say, oh, like I'm a follower of Jesus. Like what does that even mean, right? And I was looking through the scriptures and I just kind of wrote down, I referenced like all these different places in the New Testament that referred to following Jesus. And I certainly don't have time to go through all of them today. It would take up the entire time. But what I found was I was just overwhelmed by how central this thought was in the New Testament. The Gospels are written by these fellas that spent about 3 years on this road trip with Jesus. They didn't have cars. They mostly were walking everywhere they went. But 3 years, they spent this kind of extended time with Jesus. And when they were getting older and about to move on, they began to write down some of the stories from the times they spent with Jesus, stories they wanted to have preserved in going into the future so that people like us, thousands of years later, could have these precious stories as well. The Gospel of Matthew begins this kind of ministry journey with this calling of some of these disciples. There's a story in Matthew where Jesus goes down to the water and he calls to these fishermen, Peter and Andrew, and he says to them, hey, stop fishing. I want you to come and follow me. What he's asking them is to rearrange their entire life, right? He's asking them to give up their job, to give up the rhythm of their lives, to rearrange their lives to follow him. And it says, there's a little catch line where Jesus says, I'm going to teach you to fish for people, right? I'm like, nice line, Jesus, right? I'm going to teach you to fish for people, he says. And the Bible says, the story says, right away, they left their nets and followed him. Then Jesus goes a little further down and he finds this guy named James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. James and John, they're also fishermen. And Jesus says to these two fishermen, hey, I'd like you guys to also come and follow me, this invitation to go on this journey. And it says Jesus called them and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. In the book of Mark, there's this story of this man who came to Jesus and said, Jesus, I would also like to follow you. I'd like to go on these journeys with you. And he begins to tell Jesus all the ways he's qualified. And he begins to list like the 10 commandments, right? I've done this one. I've done this one. I've done this. Oh, Jesus, I'm really good at this one, right? I've never murdered anybody, right? Way to go. Okay, right? And he's like, I think I'm worthy. Can I come on this journey with you? And Jesus says, yeah, sure. But what I'm going to need you to do is I'm going to need you to go and I want you to sell everything you have. I want you to divest yourself of all the power that you have and then come and follow me. And the man's like, I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can do that. Now, I think like sometimes in the West, we tell that story, we get really focused on the finances, right? Well, what does he mean by selling and giving away all of his money? I actually don't think that's the point. I think the call of this man was Jesus saying, I'm going to need you to rearrange your life. You can't follow me by accident. Like you have all these businesses you run and all this life that you have over here. If you want to follow me, you're going to have to rearrange your life and do it on purpose. In the book of Luke, there's more information, more talk about this following of Jesus. There's a story of Jesus going to this man named Levi, and Levi was a tax collector. I've shared this before, but in case you're new with us, I'll share it again. Tax collectors were not very well liked in this time. Tax collectors were typically Jewish people who took a job with Rome to collect taxes from their friends and their neighbors to give to Rome. Would you like these people? I mean, we don't like tax collectors now, right? And he comes up to Levi, this tax collector, and says, Levi, I want you also to come with me on this trip. I want you to come and follow me. And Luke says that Levi got up, left everything behind, and followed him. Now, the book of John is a little bit more of this kind of mystical book. It's filled with all kinds of like short phrases and poetry. But listen to some of these. John 8:12 says, Jesus spoke to the people saying, I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me won't walk in darkness, but will have light and life. John 10:17, Jesus says, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. John 12:26, whoever wants to serve me must follow me, so that where I am, there my servant will be also. John 13:34, I give you a new commandment to love each other, but get this, just as I have loved you, so that you must love each other. This, he says, is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other. So the way the world knows you're a follower of Jesus is by the way you love other people. But how do you know how to love other people? Jesus says, by the way that I love you. So how do you know how Jesus is going to love you? Well, it's by walking and following along with Jesus. I think it's so evident that for these gospel writers, they wanted people for the rest of history to know such an important piece of what it means to be a Jesus person is to follow and walk with Jesus. Now, what's incredible and what affirms this is that after the gospel writers have finished their gospel texts, and these churches, these brand new churches are forming all over the place. In the New Testament are these letters, right, that got written to these churches. This idea remains central in all of these letters as well. To the church in Rome, Romans chapter 12 is the centerpiece of this book of Romans. The whole book of Romans kind of points out and back to Romans chapter 12. And Romans chapter 12 opens up this way, don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can figure out what God's will is, what is good and pleasing and mature. Don't be conformed by the patterns of this world, the patterns of the life that you live, but be transformed by renewing of your mind and living a different pattern. The letter to the church in Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 11 says, Paul writes this, follow my example just like I follow Christ. Now, I read that sometimes and I'm like, man, he's really full of himself, right? Oh yeah, you want to follow Christ? Do it how I do it. I don't think that's what he's saying. He's saying to this church that he helped start, you remember those practices I taught you? Those are practices that we learned from Jesus. Now that I'm not with you, the way you keep following Christ is by living into those same practices that we taught you, that Jesus taught us. In a letter to the church in Ephesus, Ephesians chapter 5 says, therefore, imitate God like dearly loved children. Live your life with love. Look at this, following the example of Christ. Live your life following the example of Christ. The church in Philippi, Philippians chapter 3, brothers and sisters, become imitators of me and watch those who live this way. You can use us as models. Paul is now saying to the church in Philippi, you want to know how to follow Christ? Look at other people who follow Christ, who learned how to do it from following Christ, right? That's like, this is how it gets passed on and continues to go. Continuing on, there's more. I'm going to keep going. There's another church in Colossae, right? The book of Colossians says this, so live in Christ Jesus as Lord in the same way you received him. To the church in Thessalonica, the letter to them, the first letter to them says, you become imitators of us, of the Lord, when you accepted the message that came from the Holy Spirit with joy in spite of great suffering. So he's commending them, saying, listen, the reason you've been able to survive all this suffering is because you became imitators of those who followed and walked with Jesus. In another letter to that same church, 2 Thessalonians, says this, God called all of you through our good news so that you could possess in honor of our Lord Jesus Christ. So then, brothers and sisters, stand firm and hold on to the traditions that we taught you. The things we learned from Jesus that we taught you as life goes on. Don't lose these traditions that came directly from those who walked with Jesus. And then in the Bible, we've got these other letters that are written to the general church. It's people writing to maybe multiple churches at once that are just kind of good knowledge or good wisdom for churches everywhere. The book of Hebrews is one of these letters. Book of Hebrews chapter 12 says, so then, let us also run the race that is laid in front of us, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. What's he referring to there? Those that have gone before. The cloud of witnesses are the people who have followed Jesus in the past. Again, he's pointing to this example of how to follow Jesus. He says, let us throw off any extra baggage and get rid of the sin that trips us up and fix your eyes on Jesus, faith's pioneer and perfecter. The book of James is a letter to general churches. Last summer, you might remember, we spent the whole summer. In the summer, we gather outside on the hill. It's like this amphitheater. We gather outside. It's the best. Some of you hate it. I think it's the best, all right? Book of James, written to churches all over the place, says, you must be doers of the word. Did I remind you that when James says word, he's not talking about this bound Bible we have. He's referring to Jesus. It's how he talked about the person of Jesus, is you must be doers of the word, not only hearers who mislead themselves. You need to organize your life in the way Jesus organized his life. Don't just listen to his teachings and set them aside. Peter, who was one of the leaders in the early church in Jerusalem, wrote this. He said, you were called to this kind of endurance because Christ suffered on your behalf. He left you an example that you might follow in his footsteps. Okay, I got two more. I'm going to keep going, right? John, one of the other leaders in the early church, wrote this. The one who claims to remain in him ought to live in the same way as he lived. And then the book of Revelation, right? This book that gets all kinds of questions and confusion and cred and creates all kinds of fights and debates, are these visions that John had at the end of his life. These dreams he had where there's all this imagery. And one of those dreams, there's this vision of these women who are like the faithful ones. This group of women who are seen in his vision as people who faithfully lived out the kingdom of God. And this is how he describes them in the vision. He said, they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. My friends, you cannot untether the importance of following in the way of Jesus from what it means to be a Christian. And that's why we have seasons like Lent. It's an annual season where we remind ourselves of what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a follower of Jesus is to kind of walk with Jesus again. Not something we do just for 6 or 7 weeks, but something we do all year. But for 6 or 7 weeks, we elevate the story to get the story like back in our bones, back in our body, to get this life so that outside of Lent, on the other side of Easter, we can continue to walk as Jesus walked. The church has, throughout history, tried to come up with all kinds of different ways to honor this idea. One of the ways that that's happened is sometimes, like if you were to go maybe visit a monastery or visit with sometimes they're called like intentional communities. They live by what is called a rule of life, a rule of life. Perhaps you've heard this term before. A rule of life, that word rule is not like a rule like we think of the word rule. It's not a rule like a law of life or a law that can be broken or a rule that could get you in trouble if you didn't follow the rule. It's not like a speeding sign on the side of the road, right? Actually, that word rule of life, it comes from this idea of a trellis. A trellis. Any gardeners in the room? A couple? All right. So a trellis is like something you might set in the center of your garden when you have like certain vines, or I think tomatoes sometimes need trellises. Am I right? I've never planted anything in my life. I don't know. Right? I've heard, right? But a trellis, it's so that the vine can continue to grow up through the trellis. And if you don't put a trellis out for some of this growth, then it'll just grow along the ground and the fruit will eventually what? It'll rot and die, ruin your garden, right? And so there'd be this trellis that you'd set under this vine. It's a rule for the vine to grow through so that the vine can flourish. And actually, like when you're in a garden and you put that trellis in your garden, nobody comes along when it's time to eat the tomatoes and go, whoa, that's a really nice trellis you got there. It's not about the trellis, right? The trellis, the rule for the vine is not about the rule. It's about the vine. It's for the health of the vine, so the vine can grow and produce fruit, so that fruit can then feed and nourish the living things that live around it. And so these monasteries or these different intentional communities would set what's called a rule of life, a trellis. So you know what? We're going to put these rhythms in our calendar or these rhythms in our day as this trellis to help us grow and walk in the way of Jesus. Lent is a trellis. And Lent is a trellis that maybe confronts the other trellises in our life. The truth is probably that it's not whether or not you have a trellis in your life. It's whether or not that trellis is on purpose. That Lent becomes this season where we intentionally live in to a trellis that might take up just a little bit more intentionality in our life. And we're actually meant then to notice some of the other pieces of the trellis of our lives that maybe are not so healthy for us or so good for us. It's meant to interrupt the way in which we live our lives. As you came in today, you got one of these cards with an hourglass on the top of it. You want to just grab that for a minute? This card outlines some of our trellis, our collective trellis for the season. The first and obvious one that actually we didn't even write on here because it's so obvious that we'll continue to gather here on Sundays through Lent. When we come together on Sundays, what I want you to know is that the theme of every Sunday are the historic themes of these Sundays during Lent. That we'll join in the global trellis of this season and touch on those same themes that people are touching on all around the globe. One of the trellises we're inviting us into is to pray together on Wednesdays through Lent. And we'll flip over in a minute, but on Wednesdays through Lent, we want to invite people to pray wherever you're at on that day at the same times as the rest of our community. And so while you might be praying by yourself when you wake up, you'll know that there's, 50, 60, 70, 100 other people in your church at that same time praying. In fact, we're going to help you with that. So this coming Wednesday will be the first one. We're going to release some prayer guides through our Westwinds app. You should get it. That's the best place to look. But also westwinds.org/Lent. The prayer guides will be there as well. So if you want to, you can even pray the same words that people in our community is praying, or use those words as a launching pad into more prayer for you, but it'll help us center and be praying around the same things together. In about a month, in about 4 weeks, we'll be into a week that we often call the week of rejoicing, this week where we kind of prepare our hearts to go on the difficult part of Jesus' journey. And what we're going to do this year is a listening and learning tour. We really wanted to help us understand how during this season we join a church, a global church, a church that's much broader than ours. And so there's some of our staff who are setting up some visits with some other churches in town to go and hear how they walk through the Lenten season, to go and learn about the ways in which they build their lives around Jesus. We want to go learn about some other people's trellises who build their same lives around the person of Jesus. Coming in a few weeks, I'm really excited about that. Maundy Thursday is the Thursday before Good Friday, before Easter, is a day when we remember the story of Jesus' last moments with his disciples, where he sits around a table and offers them the first communion, a practice we still practice today. And so on Maundy Thursday, which is now about 5.5 weeks away, we'll have places all over town. So at 7 a.m., 9 a.m., 11:30, 6 p.m., and 8 p.m., we'll have different establishments in our community. There'll be meetups. And so you could pick one, you could pick two, you could come to all of them if you want. But we want to spend time together where? Around tables. Why? To remember that this was such an important thing for Jesus and what it meant to follow and walk with Jesus. Good Friday, we'll gather here at 6 and this year and 8 p.m. The last 2 years, our Good Friday services has really been growing. We're running out of space. And so we're going to do 2 this year, one at 6 and one at 8, where we'll reflect on what might need to die in us so that something else might grow, resurrection. We'll follow Jesus into the grave and try to conceptualize what that might look like in our actual lives today. And then Easter Sunday, we're going to have 3 gatherings together on Easter Sunday. So we're going to do an 8 a.m. service, a 9:30 a.m. service, and then an 11:15 a.m. service. That's 15 minutes later than our typical second service, and none of those people will complain because they'll come to church as late as possible. Most of them don't show up till 11:15 a.m. anyway. But this is a trellis for our season. If you flip over the page, you can see kind of the outline of the prayer hours. And I like how this works, right? It's like at 2 a.m. or when you wake up, okay? You don't need to get up at 2 a.m. At 6 a.m. or right before you begin work. At 9 a.m., mid-morning, or whenever you're ready to take a break. At noon, or when you normally eat lunch. At 3 p.m., or in the mid-afternoon, or when you break. At sunset, or following your dinner. And then compline the last one, like before you go to sleep, before your eyes shut, just one more time of prayer. What I love about this trellis is it's integrated right into your life. And these pauses for prayer are just pauses. And so every Wednesday, we're going to invite our community to engage in these prayer hours. Maybe you'll try all of them. You know, that most of these prayers, you could take 2 minutes at each of these stops of the day and just pause for a minute and pray with your community. You set alarms on your phone if you want. The Westwinds app, we're going to have this all broken down on the app, and we actually are recording audio versions of these prayers. So you could just pop your headphones in and be guided through these prayers at each portion of the day. Again, the point is not to leave your life and go over here and try to do this thing separate from your life. The point is to build a trellis inside of your life that helps you walk with Jesus in your actual life. 2 things I kind of want to remind us of as we walk through this season. 1 is that Lent is a season of both feasting and fasting, a season of both feasting and fasting. I got asked this week, I was at the rink, walking through the lobby of the arena where I spend a lot of time. And this little girl stopped me. She was probably in 4th or 5th grade. And she goes, "Hey, you're a pastor, right?" I'm like, "I am actually." "What are you giving up for Lent?" "Well, I haven't thought about that yet. I'm still kind of thinking about that." And she's like, "I think I'm going to give up Sprite." I was like, "Great. So you're going to drink 7-Up instead?" Her mom thought that was funny, right? But there's this idea in Lent, right? Some of you might know this, that people like to give up or fast things for Lent. But the fasting it's not about spiritual virtualness, whatever. That's a word I just made up right now, right? It's not about look how spiritual I am. I fasted this thing I really love for Lent. It's actually about making space for feasting on something else. You say, I'm gonna fast from this because I want to make some space in my life to feast on something that is maybe healthier for me. So it's not even always about food. Maybe fasting from food is not a path for you. But maybe there's something in your life right now that you're like, man, I could give that up and feast on something else that would be way more healthy for me and help me maybe walk with Jesus a little more intentionally in this season. Lent is a time of feasting and fasting. Lent is also a time that's about me and about we. So the other thing with Lent is sometimes Lent can get framed like this really introspective journey, right? It's like this independent pilgrimage I'm gonna go on. I'm gonna fight through this. I want to remind you that Lent is a season of the church, that it's actually about us. And there are a lot of me kind of moments, but they're me moments inside of a vehicle with other people on this long road trip towards the cross and resurrection of Jesus. And so, yeah, there's going to be moments and callings and commitments on your own life to maybe be introspective or shift some things. But you're not meant to Lent alone. Actually, I would say Lenting alone is doing it the wrong way. You're meant to Lent inside of a community, inside of the community, the communion of saints, people all around the globe throughout history who have went on this same journey. Are you sold on it yet? It's this invitation to step inside of a story and get this story inside of you. It's a time when we show up, maybe a little more intentionally than we normally show up. It's a time when we pay attention. We pay attention maybe a little more closely than we normally pay attention. It's a time when we join with other people, maybe a little more intentionally than we normally join with other people. And so that's why for us, one of our 2 table seasons is right in the middle of Lent. I don't know if I can say this more clearly. I think being in a table is one of the most important things we do together as a church. I think being in a table is one of the most important things we can do together in our society today. I don't know if you feel it, but I certainly feel it. The whole world pulling me towards further isolation. My thoughts, my opinions, my nuances, further and further into isolation. And tables are this trellis that brings us back to the table, to see and be seen by other people, to share in meals with people who have different political opinions than I do, to share in meals with people who have different theological thoughts than I do, to share in meals with people who have been on a different spiritual journey than I've been on, to sit around a table with people who, just like the disciples on Maundy, Thursday, look to Jesus and all have a different perspective on exactly what it is Jesus is up to. These tables are so important. And today is the last day to get signed up. I think you should sign up. This invitation to walk the path of Jesus with other people. Can I say this? Following Jesus is not a side thing that we do. It's central to what it means to be a Christian. It's actually the very definition of Christian. The first time the word kind of Christian shows up is early in the new church. And it was actually outsiders that started to refer to these Jesus followers as little Christs. To be a Christian is learning to be a little Christ. So whether or not we should or shouldn't do this is the question. We should follow Jesus. The question we ask is, how do we do this? And so what I'm not saying is that the way our church moves through Lent is the right way. It's just the how we do it together, which is why for a portion of this journey, we're going to go listen and learn from other communities that have a different how they do it. But I do want to invite you, since you're here right now, to go on this journey with us. So it's 10:29. My sermon is over. And there's no music. There's no emotional prayer. Actually, in a minute, we're just going to cue the music at the back, like service is done. And I wonder if you might just, if you want, pause for a minute. Maybe you get out your phone and bring up the app or go to westwinds.org/tables and peruse the tables. Maybe there's one in your county or on a day or time that works for you. There's like 20 different tables all over the county at different times in different places. Maybe before you leave the room, you could sign up for one. You're like, there's 1 week I can't make it. That's okay. Just be an adult and tell your host you can't make it that week, right? You can still sign up. Maybe you want to just like set some reminders in your phone, right? Maybe you want to pull this out, right? And right now, put Monday, Thursday in your phone. Maybe right now you want to put Good Friday in your phone. Maybe right now you want to put on your schedule to be here at one of these service times. Maybe you want to sit for a minute and put reminders in your phone on Wednesdays for each of these things to pop up at different times throughout your day, right? Maybe we could just take a minute, no rush. And if you leave right away, no one's judging you. We'll just assume you're going to do this when you get home because that's easier for you and you have a paper calendar. It's not a big deal. But I want to encourage you in this season for 6-7 weeks, intentionally reorganize your life to follow Jesus and be curious about what that might do in your life.